Michelle Obama. Kyle, she does have bigger back muscles than you. Pretty off-putting if you ask me. DarbyCast, Wildcard Friday. Kyle and I were just talking about strength and how important it is. Not necessarily back muscles if you're a woman. There's a lot of gals at the gym, right, Kyle, that take it too far. Listen, everybody loves when gals are in good shape. But there is a line, and many have, in fact, crossed it in a huge way. They're not just sticking a toe in the water. They're doing a cannonball. Splish splash, burlyback.com, Kyle. Very inappropriate. If you're new to the show, we're about to get into the meat and potatoes of life, as we always do, right, Kyle? But if you're new, let me invite you to get lost. Leave. You might not belong. In a world that wants to prioritize inclusivity, we take the opposite approach here. This is an elite group that's not for everybody, and that's pretty sweet. And now let me pivot to make a huge disclosure. There's a lot going on in the world right now. And for that reason, we're not going to focus on any of it today. How about that? It's what we like to call in the industry a rope-a-dope. You think I'm coming in with the uppercut and then you get sideswiped in the face by a pleasant surprise. As a metaphor. Not bad. Moving on. This is going to be a big year. This is our year as a community. Not just you and me, Kyle. All the DarbyCast doctors. This is our year. And rather than focus on the dysfunction of the world, today it makes the most sense to lift our spirits using the discipline of time travel. Many of you probably just released an exasperated sigh where you went, oh, gosh, I needed this. I know. Okay. I know. But we're going to go somewhere that we haven't been before. And it's pretty serious. Ancient Egypt. You ever heard of it, Kyle? We will be taking the SS DarbyCast time travel vessel. Looks a lot like an aircraft carrier. Very futuristic. Nice coat of paint on it. Don't want an ancient Egyptian sandstorm to muck things up. So fresh paint, always a good call. But now more so than ever, right? Some of you right now are asking, who's coming on this time travel journey? Who is it? Who will it be? And I'm going to tell you right now, it's people who make quite a bit of sense if you know how to think correctly. Obviously, it will be you, me, and Kyle. It's a slam dunk. The wild cards, though, Joe Biden, Anthony Fauci. But that's not all. Dr. Jordan Peterson and Greta Thunberg. An unlikely hodgepodge of public figures that people have varying opinions on. We're going to find out a lot about each and every one of them on this time travel journey. Boy, aren't we? So now, if you have the capacity for it, close your eyes and imagine you're on this beautiful time vessel. We stop in Washington, D.C. We pick up Joe Biden and Fauci. Then we go to L.A. We pick up Dr. Peterson. Then we blast on over to Denmark and pick up Thunberg, who's just yelling at some old guy at a coffee shop. You, being a leader, you walk over to the old guy and you say, disregard whatever she told you. This chick sucks. And we all like that out of you, stepping up early, kind of teasing at your leadership abilities. Kyle, you didn't step up. You didn't help that guy out. That's a -1 for you, Kyle. But we get on the time machine, and because Kyle has been demoted, I say to you, go ahead, punch in the time coordinates. You're the first mate of this time vessel now. And you don't hold it over Kyle's head. He knows what shame is just fine, and it's coursing throughout his entire being. I instruct Kyle to get everybody some mineral water. It's going to be pretty toasty in ancient Egypt. Dehydration, that's not a foe I'm willing to face. Could be some pretty spooky shit that we encounter, but dehydration will not be one of those things. Joe Biden's wandering around the time machine, bumping into walls. Fauci asks, are there any beagles on board for me to torture? And we're all beginning to question the decision of bringing him at all pretty early. Greta Thunberg demands to see the carbon emissions, the carbon footprint of the time machine. And Jordan Peterson steps up and says, go to hell. So as you can tell, our team dynamic is strong, almost too strong, some might say. You wrangle Joe Biden, you stuff him inside a harness, and then you leash him up. And I say to you, you don't have to take on this responsibility. And you say, I'm fine with it. I'm a team player. Joe Biden remarks that he's excited to be going to space so he can finally get to meet some real life dinosaurs. You begin explaining what we're actually up to, and I kind of cut you off. I take no pleasure in cutting you off, but I say, what's the point? He's not going to remember any of this anyway. And that's what we like to call an example of leaders leading leaders, because everybody needs some coaching from time to time. Joe Biden pulls a slinky out of his pocket that he smuggled aboard the time travel whodunit, and that keeps him thoroughly occupied. You enter the time coordinates, space-time coordinates, because we've got to get to the Nile. We're going back to 1320 BC. That's the farthest into the past we've ever ventured. But none of us are scared, except for Jordan Peterson, who begins crying. He's been doing that a lot lately. It's pretty concerning, actually. Some of you right now might be asking yourselves, this is all great, but why are we doing this? And that's a fair question. There's an artifact, a serious artifact at that we need. We will recover it in ancient Egypt, and we will use it to correct the wrongs of a corrupt empire. Western civilization seems as though it's not doing so hot. So we, as time-traveling heroes, have taken it upon ourselves to do the right thing. What did you just feel in your heart when I said that? Hope, inspiration, courage. I look over at you and give you the nonverbal signal that it's time to push the big red button that will zap us back in time. But right as you're about to push it, Fauci yells, "Wait!" We all turn to Fauci and he says, "Can I have access to the snack room?" The last time we brought Fauci on a time travel journey, we denied him access to the snack room, which is loaded. Doritos, Pringles, Capri Sun, Oreos, Dunkaroos, Fruit by the Foot, Gushers, beef jerky, Butterfingers, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, Snickers, Twizzlers. Now let's take a time out. If any of you got excited over Twizzlers, leave. That was a test, and boy, did you fail. Twizzlers are disgusting, and every mentally stable person knows it. So if you were excited over Twizzlers, hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're crazy and you're going to need to leave. You walk over to Fauci and you grab him by the scruff of his shirt and lift him off his feet, which actually isn't that tough. He weighs like 70 pounds. You throw him into his chair, you strap it up, and you say, "The snack room is for heroes, and there is no conceivable redemption arc for you because of the terrible things that you've done. You're a perpetual villain, Fauci. Therefore, the snack room is not your domain." Kyle and I are blown away by your communication skills. So direct, so honest. You have established yourself, not just as a leader, but as an intellectual authority. Powerful reasoning skills. We know Fauci's going to lie a lot on this trip, but we're prepared for it. Nobody's going to be hoodwinked by his BS. I motion to you to hit the button so we can really kick this thing off. Right as you're about to hit it, Greta Thunberg yells, "The world's going to explode because of climate stuff." We don't even acknowledge that she spoke as a team because she's craving a response. Greta continues, says, "You hate the planet. You hate forests and animals. You hate birds." And as much as we don't want to react to that, we actually really enjoy birds. You, me, Kyle. We all look at one another and I say, "Guys, I got this one." So I march over to Greta and I say, "Listen, nobody in this world is excited about pollution. We don't like seeing natural habitats get destroyed. The number one polluters in this world are mainly large corporations, China and India. So unless you want to get to work on dismantling multinational corporations and or nuking China and India, you can just fuck right off." And she doesn't have a rebuttal for that because nobody's ever been so honest and direct with her. She respects it and she thinks that we're now friends, but she's also autistic. So she's misreading the situation. I hold nothing but contempt for this girl. You go ahead and you hit the button. And with flashes of lightning, we are back in ancient Egypt. We all get in time-appropriate clothing, white linen. For Fauci, instead of tasteful linen cloth, I just cut a couple holes in a burlap sack of potatoes and say, "This one's you, Anthony." We turn on the time machine's cloaking device and disembark. We are arrested by the beauty of the Egyptian architecture. We see an ancient golden statue of Horus, and we like that. We make our way towards the Nile River, and Dr. Peterson starts crying again. He says, "Slay the dragon, man. Belly of the whale. Pinocchio. Order and chaos. Clean your room." Joe Biden's still going pretty hard on that slinky. It's hot as all hell out. Greta thinks it would be an appropriate time to talk about heat waves and how it relates to global climate. And boy, don't you shut it down quickly. You look her way and you say, "Greta, let's just not, okay?" We wade into the Nile up to our knees. The cool water against our shins and calves feels poetically refreshing. Fauci calls out, "This sucks," which we all know is a lie because it's great. We knew he was going to say stupid shit this whole time. We're going to try to not let it faze us because we've got something important to do. We got to find this artifact. As our senses are being almost completely overwhelmed by the natural beauty of this ancient civilization, we're approached, and a confident and powerful voice addresses us. Who is it? Some of you already know, but for those of you who don't, it's King Tut. And what does he say? I'm King Tut. Very straightforward. No nonsense kind of guy. We like that. Jordan Peterson begins to cry even harder, which is not appropriate for the situation. Joe Biden lost the slinky in the Nile, and that's kind of on you because you were Joe Biden's handler, and you should have known that he can't be trusted to keep track of anything. You apologize and take full responsibility for the situation, further cementing your reputation as a leader. I look over at King Tut and I say, "We're searching for an ancient artifact. One that's a pretty big deal, actually. It has the power to defeat evil in a huge way. King Tut responds, well, that's what Egypt's all about. I'm in. I hold up my hand to give King Tut a high five, and he goes for it. It's the first high five he's ever given or ever received, and he nailed it. Pretty obvious why the people respected him as a pharaoh, as a hero. He could think on his feet and then do the right thing. Kyle oversteps and speaks to the pharaoh, even though he wasn't addressed. And he asks King Tut, he says, what's the meaning of life? We're all pretty scared for Kyle in this moment because as third in command, you just addressed the royalty in front of you without any kind of proper introduction. What the fuck are you thinking, dude? But King Tut isn't a slave to convention. And so he simply responds to Kyle. You just dodged a bullet, Kyle. I hope you know that. King Tut says, the meaning of life is whatever you want it to be. Wow, right? We all smile at each other. Dr. Peterson is still crying. Greta Thunberg tries to explain to King Tut why climate change is a big deal and how we need to raise tax money on middle and lower class people. But King Tut isn't having it. Boy, is he not. He kicks her in the face. And we are so impressed with his flexibility and mobility. Guy's probably been doing hamstring stretches. You can't kick that high, typically, when you're as strong looking as King Tut. He's yoked. Dude's fucking ripped. But fitness is about more than just strength, right, Kyle? Greta got kicked in the face. And our major takeaway from that was that we like King Tut a lot. Total expert when it comes to making good decisions. Where are we going to find the legendary artifact? I inquire. King Tut responds, we will find the legendary artifact in the secret cave of chaos beneath the Great Pyramid. Fauci asks, where can I find an all-male bathhouse for research? King Tut answers, we don't have those. However, we do have a scorpion pit where we regularly throw liars and predators. Fauci fires back, that wouldn't suit me because I'm a great guy who tells the truth. King Tut isn't buying it. He senses that Fauci is lying. And he asks me, he said, why did you bring this guy with you? Kyle chimes in case we get frustrated and need to beat the crap out of someone. Kind of a release valve from a physio-emotional standpoint. Good word, Kyle. Physio-emotional. King Tut silently nods with approval. He gets it. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is sniffing Greta Thunberg's hair while mumbling about ice cream and racism. King Tut shoves Biden off of Greta, but then he turns towards Greta and spits in her face. I don't like either of you very much, he exclaims. Tomorrow, we will enter the cave of chaos. Tonight, however, we will relax at my palace. Some of you were wondering, where are the academic messages in this story that are going to help me move forward this next year? And did you really just miss that one? The utility and value of a good night's sleep? Critical. So important. I'm sneaking messages in left and right. And some people are going to miss these, which is a prime reason for listening to episodes multiple times and even going back in the catalog and enjoying DarbyCast many times over. No problems there, none whatsoever. We followed King Tut to his royal residence. He offers us refreshments, and as we're consuming them, I turn to you and I say, my only critique of these refreshments is they might be a little too refreshing. How good are these? You glance back at me with a half smile to communicate both that you agree and that we've got a nice budding friendship going and that we'd both like to see it continue. Friendship's important. Fauci petitions Do you have any gluten-free options? And we should have known that Fauci was one of those gluten whodunits a long time ago. Greta sits down on a couch with Dr. Peterson, and Peterson addresses Greta, and he says, "You're a malevolent agent of chaos. I bet you haven't even read my book. You're a Malthusian, malicious, menacing, melancholy monster." I know my Dr. Peterson sounds a little bit like Dr. Evil from Austin Powers, but that's just kind of how it's going to be. I don't know how to do a Canadian accent. Peterson continues, laying it on pretty thick. "You've got a tiny body and an enormous ego. You're a piece of trash." As Dr. Peterson continues to plaster Greta's world with truth bombs, I hear something behind me. Very quiet, very subtle noise, but not okay. You and I, we turn around at the same time, and what do we see? A humongous snake, and it's heading straight for us. King Tut relaxes us, says, "Hey guys, relax. This is my pet cobra. He's my pet, and he's my friend. Fun fact, he has the ability to kill anyone within 18 feet of him." Now, notice how he said 18 feet. Could have said 20, could have said 15, but he went for a number that was too specific to be a lie. You know he's tested this snake out at a variety of distances. 18 feet is the max range. He probably wanted to get it to 20. Any honest snake owner, of which there are few, would tell you that it is the deepest desire of their heart to increase the striking range of their serpentine friend. You look at King Tut and you say, "King Tut, I think your snake's awesome." And that's a heady diplomatic play out of you. You're not all in on snakes, but you are all in on King Tut and strengthening our alliance with him. And that's what we needed out of you. King Tut's pretty fired up to be spending time with new friends who share his interests. Kyle speaks out of turn yet again and says, "King Tut, I'd like to see a demonstration, please." And what an inappropriate request that was, Kyle. Although I'm intrigued as well. And part of me is excited that you were courageous enough to call it out. I have mixed emotions towards what you just said, Kyle. King Tut is looking around the room, and you better believe that his glance finds Joe Biden, who is wandering around aimlessly and moving with the coordination of somebody who's in a three-legged race. You ever seen two people with their inner legs tied together and they try to move as a unit? That's what Joe Biden looks like, but there's no other person. He's just stomping around. King Tut whispers in a language that none of us can understand except for the snake. And the snake slithers over and ices Joe Biden with a swift bite to the neck. We're all really impressed, except for Greta, who cries out. She says, "No!" And King Tut says, "He was half dead already. You have to know that." I tap Jordan Peterson on the shoulder and I say, "The snake's kind of like eyeballing you, Jordan." And Peterson stands up. He looks the snake right in the eye and he says, "Get away. I'm a published author." And the snake stopped in its tracks and instead bit Fauci in the arm repeatedly. Really got in there. Fauci is not taking this very well. He's yelling, totally messing up the ambiance. We were having a nice little snack session, and he has the gall to scream. He says, "It feels like my heart's going to explode." You turn to Fauci and say, "That means it's working. Safe and effective, Fauci. Safe and effective." And I turn to you and I give you a pretty strong thumbs up. It has become abundantly clear that we are aligned in our thinking, in our senses of humor, and what we think is tasteful timing for a dark joke. And that feels pretty damn good. King Tut, tremendous host, sees that Fauci's screams are making us pretty uncomfortable. And so he snaps his fingers, and one of his servants comes out with a scimitar. Scimitar? Scimitar. Kyle, how do you say that? I've only seen it in print. I don't know a ton of people who talk about swords, so I've just never heard it. In any case, Fauci gets his arm lopped off, and then the servant takes a torch and cauterizes the wound. I believe in science, gasps Fauci as he collapses onto the floor. King Tut continues to put on a show in the how to be a host of a great house party department. Snaps his fingers again. 2 more servants pop out. They lift up Fauci, and then they chuck him in the Egyptian equivalent of a dumpster. He needs rest, says King Tut. We all do. What a leader. It's getting pretty late, though. So King Tut shows us all to our chambers. We each get our own bedroom. You, me, and Kyle. And King Tut, amazing host, offers all of us some whores. And you're a first mover on this. You say, not for me. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow. I just need some shut-eye. I'd like to stay focused. You took the words right out of my mouth. Kyle, however, was seriously considering it. And Kyle, sometimes you just got to think to yourself, like, what are my priorities? What do I need to get handled? We're looking for an artifact, man. This trip is not about exotic whores and the wide variety of mouth pleasures that they most certainly could offer. Get it together, Kyle. If you're listening to this, I don't care whether you're a guy or a gal. Just know that those whores would have taken care of you in a way that would just knock your socks off. But you turned it down, and it was the right call for so many different reasons. I'm so happy to call you my friend. King Tut pops into our bedrooms, gives all of us high fives before bed. Pretty amazing that he's already integrated that mannerism and started using it in a way that's like almost too effective. It just made all of us feel so relaxed. We went straight to bed. King Tut then escorts Dr. Peterson and Greta to where they'll be sleeping. And it's just a couple of couches. And I think that's fair. You know, normally I'm of the school of thought that you give preferential bedroom assignments to your elders. But Peterson has not been acting his age. He's been crying a lot. And don't get me wrong, guy says a lot of smart things. He's a sharp fella. But he has not been putting his best foot forward on this journey. He just hasn't. And Greta, my goodness, the amount of time she's struck out over the past couple hours, she's lucky to be indoors. Peterson's still got a little bit of energy. He's not quite ready to call it a night. And so he takes the opportunity to have a little pillow talk with Greta. Couches are close enough together that they can get some words in. Peterson's respectful, though. He knows everybody else is asleep, so he uses his indoor voice. He says, "Hey, Greta, you're a demented, narcissistic psychopath. You're a loser who doesn't know the first thing about clinical psychology or psychiatry. You're a mindless moron." Greta doesn't respond. The fact of the matter is, she misses her status back in 2023 when she was a semi-respected climate activist. She thinks to herself, I wish Greenpeace would come and save me. And that doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. They don't exist in ancient Egypt. And even if they did, this is not part of their company mission. The next morning, we're all awake, bright and early, feeling pretty good. But things get better because King Tut announces that he's got a pretty mean breakfast in store for us. Peterson chimes in. He says, breakfast isn't unimportant, you know. It sets the tone for the rest of the day. If you don't have a good breakfast, you're probably going to run into trouble later that day. When I was a kid, my dad would ask me, "Did you have a good breakfast?" And I would say, "Yes, Dad. I had a great breakfast." Rough way to start the day, right? Like, we get it. Breakfast is important. It didn't need a whole lot of supporting evidence. But the fact that the supporting evidence that you used, Peterson, was that airball of a story, not the way I'd like to start a day, I'll tell you that much. We're all munching on eggs, various cured meats. And then Fauci rolls in, and none of us are excited to see him. And we didn't discuss this at any point prior to his arrival. We all just independently make the decision to not ask him about his arm and the snake attack. And it's not because we're trying to avoid an elephant in the room. It's simply because we don't care about Fauci's well-being. But Fauci says to us, "Guys, I had a terrible dream last night." Nobody asks any follow-up questions. We just keep enjoying our breakfast. Fauci continues. He says, "There were serpents and puppies and a demon witch." And then he went on, described his entire dream in exhaustive detail. And at the very end, when he asked, "Can somebody interpret this for me?" King Tut, he stepped up and said, "It sounds like you're gay. Anyway, let's go get that artifact you guys are looking for." What an alpha. Just put Fauci right in his place. I can't even begin to imagine the kind of psychological pain that was inflicted with that comment by King Tut. And then to just say, "Now let's get back to business." That's leadership 101. Imagine sharing a deeply personal dream with a group of people, and then the coolest person in the group calls you a queer and leaves zero space for you to defend yourself. So strategic by King Tut. Incredibly devastating for Fauci. We stride out of the palace into the morning sun. King Tut assembles a small army of servants and whores, and we hop on some pretty cool looking chariots. Top of the line, as far as I understand. You, King Tut, and Fauci are all in the same chariot. And as we're all riding out into the desert, you turn to King Tut and you say, "King Tut, why the whores?" And he turns to you and he says, "Why not?" And you both smile at one another. And then you take a mental snapshot of this moment, and it'll stick with you for your entire life. That time that you had a beautiful connection with a king. Fauci tries to get in on the joke, riff on it a little bit. He's like, "Yeah, bring on the whores." All the laughter stops abruptly. King Tut raises his fist to the sky to let everybody in the caravan know we got to come to a quick pit stop. And then King Tut slaps Fauci in the face so hard that Fauci falls off the chariot. Sun's beating down. Fauci's a mess. And King Tut gets real low to the ground where he can whisper in Fauci's ear. And he says, "Don't ever try to be a part of anything, ever again. Do I make myself clear?" Fauci agrees with his silence. We all get back on the chariots. And after several hours, we arrive at the pyramid that sits atop the Cave of Chaos. We arm ourselves with swords, spears, and bows, because we don't know what's going on in the Cave of Chaos. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Dr. Peterson, who had been understandably pretty quiet since breakfast after that huge miss of a story, he's ready to drop another comment. He looks at King Tut and he says, "Be careful, it's the Cave of Chaos." And King Tut says, "I know. I was the one who told you about it in the first place." It's another miss for JP. King Tut takes out his bejeweled royal scepter and inserts it into a hidden keyhole on a seemingly ordinary stone in this pyramid. A secret door opens and we all move inside. King Tut, somewhat of a player coach, gives us all the heads up to be careful because this place is rife. It is infested with traps. He looks at all of us and says, "This is about to be dangerous." Greta Thunberg says, "As dangerous as climate change and carbon emissions." And that's when Jordan Peterson decides that it's his time to shine. He steps towards Greta and says, "Miss Thunberg, you're way out of your league. I'm a clinical psychologist and an award-winning author. Read the Gulag Archipelago, and you might understand something about the Soviets." Not the most straightforward way to get somebody to pipe down, but Greta doesn't respond. So, mission accomplished. We all keep moving into the pyramid, but we stop at a heavy door. King Tut, resourceful, uses his royal scepter to pull off some more Egyptian whodunitry. And the door swings open. And then, without warning, the attack begins. Kyle calls it out. He says, "We're under attack." Good job, Kyle. Effective communication is essential for teamwork. I've got nothing but good things to say about that, Kyle. But we're facing a group of mummies, and they are moving way faster than any of us would have ever dreamed. They are sprinting at us. But then Peterson shouts at them. He says, "Clean your fucking room." And then, as if by magic, the mummies are obliterated by gale force winds. Just when we thought the danger was over, more mummies show up. Hundreds of mummies. We all look over at Peterson, and he looks over at the mummies, and then he shouts, "Alexander Solzhenitsyn!" And the wind of 1,000 hurricanes is unleashed, decimates the mummies. They're fucking toast. King Tut turns to Peterson and he says, "Hey, so how'd you do that? What is this all about?" Which is a good question. Peterson replies, he says, "I have the power to stop movements from gaining traction by using nothing other than my words. That's how it works. Words matter." Really insufficient explanation overall. That's kind of what we're all thinking. But we follow King Tut through another hallway, which leads us to a staircase. And this staircase looks as though it could be thousands of steps in the descent. We make our way down, and at the bottom of this staircase, sure enough, there is a jagged entrance to a cave. This is it, right? The Cave of Chaos. It's pitch black, though. There's no torches. You're feeling bold, though, and you say, "Let's go for it." And I love the way you just took initiative. We all do, actually. So we press on through this dark and mysterious cave. And after about 30 minutes of wandering in the dark, we arrive at a massive, well-lit cavern quasi-cathedral. And in the center of this room is a single dagger suspended in a ray of sunlight. This was the artifact we were looking for, and Fauci sprints over to the dagger and grabs it with his remaining arm. And almost instantaneously, his arm explodes. So at first, we were all pretty disgusted that Fauci thought he deserved to be the one to capture the artifact. But then we were all pretty relieved when we found out that being the first one to touch it would blow your arm off. It's a nice lesson in not jumping to conclusions too quickly. Sometimes you got to let things play out a little bit. You turn to me and you say, "I'm glad Fauci did that." And I turn to you and I say, "So am I." But then the tattered remains of Fauci's arm begin to congeal and morph into a gigantic monster, which in truth looks quite a bit like Wolf Blitzer, except a lot bigger and more Egyptian, thematically. Fauci tries his hand at diplomacy and says, "I'm Fauci. I'm a scientist." Without a word, King Tut steps up, jogs over to the beast, takes his royal scepter, and just as we think he's going to knock this thing's block off, he winds up and just tees off into Fauci's ribcage. Then he beats the monster to death. Kyle goes over, collects the artifact, and then asks King Tut, he says, King Tut, how does this thing work? We're all wondering, Kyle, no shame in asking that. King Tut says it's imbued with a magical essence that can compel people to tell the truth. Also, you can stab people with it. As a clarifying play, you follow up and say, so it's like most weapons? You use the threat of force, or you just use force, and by using it, you can enact your will? King Tut says, well, yeah, pretty much. That's the magic of violence, or implied violence. Gets a lot of things done. We take the artifact and make our way back to the surface. And just as we're about to exit the cave and go up that staircase, Jordan Peterson says, we can't go yet. And you say, well, why not? And he says, I haven't finished explaining my thoughts on Russia and the Soviets. Stalin was a horrible guy, man. He never cleaned his room. You rightfully ask him, how do you know that? And he says, I've read the Gulag Archipelago. And although that wasn't a good explanation, we accept it because we didn't want to continue listening. We venture back to the surface, into the light. Chariots are still there. No shortage of horrors. And we're feeling pretty good. Now, this is the sad part of the journey because we have to say goodbye to King Tut. We give him hugs, and he had never experienced anything like that before. Hugging was not part of their culture, but he allowed it. Greta tries to give King Tut a hug, but he shoves her away, and he says, I'm glad I mistreated you throughout this whole thing. You don't get a free pass to just run your mouth because you're a child, or because you're a lady, or because you're ugly. And that's why King Tut's Pharaoh. He's not going to sugarcoat what he means with BS. Dr. Peterson began sobbing. He had gone for so long, like a day and a half without crying. And King Tut saw this as a coaching opportunity, so he went up to JP and he said, when you go back to the present, maybe you use your words to organize people instead of whatever you're doing right now. Peterson responds, it's not obvious that I should do that. Yes, it is, says King Tut. What's your deal? JP fires back. He says, I'm an intelligence asset to keep young men from organizing and doing anything meaningful with their feelings of frustration and anger. King Tut takes a second, mulls it over, and then he says, what if you stop doing that? Good food for thought, right? King Tut gives Kyle a high five. It's so loud. The servants and whores begin cheering. Then King Tut comes up to you and me, and we execute the first group hug in human history. And King Tut says to us, I'm going to miss you too the most. Fauci, who is miraculously alive after losing both of his arms, one to a giant cobra and the other to a magical explosion, bodies his way into the group hug, tries to get in on the action. Not okay. King Tut shoves Fauci away. And Fauci says, that's fine, I didn't even want a hug. But that was a lie. We all know Fauci wanted a hug from King Tut. Fauci keeps running his mouth. He says, when I get back to the present, I'm going to tell everybody what happened here and that you guys are bad people and that I am the hero. And King Tut, boy, is he not having it. He goes over to Fauci, lifts him high in the air, and then spikes his little body into the ground. And then he does it again and again. And none of us try to stop King Tut. No, we don't. We just make our way back to the time machine on the chariots. And that's the end of the journey. We lost Biden and Fauci on this one. But what we gained in knowledge, far more important. The magic of violence. And then a little bit of personal coaching for Greta and JP. Some friendship for you and me. And Kyle, per usual, you should just be excited you were included in this. And I'd say we're better friends, having done another adventure together, right? Good job, Kyle. But that's DarbyCast, Wildcard Friday.